When I first joined Harrington Dynamics, it felt like stepping into the future I'd always dreamed of. Sleek glass offices stretched across 2 floors, and the hum of quiet ambition filled every hallway. People walked briskly, voices measured, confidence worn like designer suits. To many, it was just another corporate job, but to me, it was the place where I would prove myself. I started as a junior operations analyst, tucked away in a corner cubicle where no one noticed me. But I noticed everything. Every missed opportunity, every inefficiency, every chance to make things better. Within a year, my reports were being circulated company-wide. By year 2, I was sitting in on meetings with senior management, quietly offering suggestions that others began to repeat as their own. I didn't mind. Recognition wasn't my goal, impact was. The COO at the time, Mr. Callahan, had once told me, "You've got the instincts of a strategist, Emily. Keep this up, and you'll be running this department in no time." His words weren't just encouragement. They were a promise I held on to during every late night and every weekend spent, refining forecasts and designing process models. I wasn't chasing praise. I was building a foundation. My coworkers respected me for my work ethic. I wasn't loud or flashy, but when deadlines closed in and crises struck, they came to me. I became the quiet problem solver, the one who could untangle chaos with a calm mind and a well-timed spreadsheet. By my 5th year, I had led several successful initiatives, streamlining supplier chains, reducing costs, and even helping secure $1 million partnership that saved an entire division from closure. Senior leadership began referring to me as indispensable. Rumors floated that I'd be next in line for a senior role. The COO position was still far above my title, but I could feel the distance narrowing. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was early spring. Sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 19th floor. The company had just announced an internal restructuring, and speculation buzzed like static in the air. I walked into the conference room, coffee in hand, heart racing with cautious optimism. That's when Daniel Harrington walked in, the CEO's nephew, freshly returned from a 2-year consulting stint in London. He looked every bit the part, tailored suit, expensive watch, and a practiced, easy smile that charmed instantly. The CEO introduced him as the new face of innovation and mentioned that Daniel would be working closely with the executive team. At first, I didn't think much of it. Companies like ours always had their share of nepotism hires, usually more style than substance. But within days, Daniel's name began appearing on meeting invites, project memos, and even leadership briefings I'd been part of for years. Still, I stayed professional. I told myself that merit would always outweigh connections. I believed that hard work couldn't be ignored forever. Then came the first meeting where Daniel cut me off mid-sentence, smiling like it was a joke, and said the words that would echo in my head for months to come. "You should probably wait your turn. Emily, some of us have bigger plans to handle first." Laughter rippled lightly across the room. I forced a polite smile, but my stomach tightened. It wasn't just arrogance, it was a warning. That moment marked the first crack in the dream I had built. The place that once represented growth and opportunity suddenly felt different, colder, quieter, more political. But I didn't know then that this was only the beginning. I didn't realize that the man who had told me to wait my turn would soon give me the very reason to take mine. After that meeting, Daniel's words echoed in my head for days. "Wait your turn." The way he said it, with that smug, knowing smirk, it wasn't just a dismissal. It was a declaration of dominance. And what hurt most wasn't that he interrupted me, but that no one in the room thought twice about it. I told myself not to take it personally. Corporate life had its hierarchies, and sometimes egos inflated faster than resumes. Still, I decided to keep my head down and let my work speak louder than any insult could, for weeks. I worked tirelessly on an upcoming expansion proposal, a plan to streamline operations across our East Coast branches. It was the kind of strategy that could reshape how the company functioned, efficient, profitable, and forward-thinking. I pored over data until midnight, refining every slide, anticipating every question. I wanted it to be flawless. When the day of the executive presentation arrived, I walked into the boardroom with a quiet confidence. Mr. Callahan, the COO, gave me an encouraging nod. Daniel sat across the table, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up. I brushed it off and began presenting. The first few minutes went smoothly. Charts, projections, timelines, all perfectly in place. I noticed several board members leaning forward, interested. Then, halfway through, Daniel interrupted. "Hold on," he said, raising a hand casually. "I think we've already discussed a similar strategy during my time in London. Emily, you might be overcomplicating things." The room went still. "I'm sorry?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Daniel smiled thinly. "It's a good effort, really. But expansion without first restructuring supplier relations is a rookie move. We did something similar in the EU sector, saved millions. I can share the model if needed." I glanced toward Mr. Callahan, but his expression was unreadable. The CEO leaned back, thoughtful. Daniel continued, seamlessly hijacking my presentation, spinning it as though my work were a mere footnote to his supposed experience. Every word he said chipped away at the confidence I'd built over 5 years. I stood there, silent, trying to hold my composure as my presentation, turned into his performance. When it ended, polite applause followed. Not for me. For him. Afterward, Mr. Callahan approached me quietly. "Don't take it to heart," he said. "Sometimes perception beats preparation." Perception? The word stung. A week later, the revised version of my proposal was circulated internally, now titled the Harrington Expansion Model. My name was nowhere on IT. I confronted Daniel in his office the next morning. "You used my data, my projections, you even copied my slides." He leaned back in his chair, looking amused. "Relax, Emily, it's called collaboration. Besides, it's not about who wrote the slides. It's about who got them approved. Welcome to the big leagues." He smirked again, that same condescending curve of his lips that said, "You're not one of us." For the first time since joining Harrington Dynamics, I felt powerless. Years of hard work had been wiped clean with one smug smile and a family name. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, the city lights flickering through my window. Quitting crossed my mind. But then I remembered why I had started, not to impress anyone, but to build something that lasted. If Daniel wanted to play politics, fine. But I wasn't going to be his victim. That night, I made myself a quiet promise. I would never let him steal my work or my dignity again. What I didn't know was that Daniel's rise had only just begun, and so had my resolve to bring him down the right way. If part 2 was the warning, what came next was the slow bleed. Daniel didn't just take my ideas, he began to erase my presence entirely. At first, it was subtle. A few of my reports went missing from shared folders. Invitations to leadership briefings stopped arriving in my inbox. When I asked about them, Daniel would flash that practiced, dismissive grin and say, "Oh, must have been a mix-up. I'll loop you in next time." He never did, but I noticed something deeper, a quiet shift in perception. Colleagues who used to greet me warmly now looked unsure, almost cautious, as if associating with me had suddenly become risky. Daniel, with his charm and name, had started whispering narratives behind closed doors that I was too rigid, too by the book, a little emotional under pressure, all lies. Of course, but in corporate politics, repetition turns rumor into reputation. The real breaking point came during the Q3 strategy review. It was a major event, our department's chance to present performance outcomes directly to the board. I had led the data analysis for months, organizing every figure, double-checking every margin. 2 days before the meeting, Daniel approached me in the hallway, casual as ever. "Hey, Emily," he said, leaning against the glass wall. "I might need your slides for the presentation deck." "My slides?" I asked, blinking. "I thought I'd be presenting them myself." "Oh, yeah. About that." His tone was syrupy. "The CEO wants consistency in messaging. He asked me to handle it. Don't take it personally, it's just optics." Optics? That word again, the day of the presentation. I sat near the back of the boardroom as Daniel clicked through my work on the screen, my analysis, my recommendations, my entire narrative, and delivered it as though it had sprung fully formed from his own mind. The audience nodded along, impressed by his clarity, his vision, his understanding of operational depth. When the CEO praised him afterward, Daniel turned, met my eyes across the room, and gave me that same smirk. The one that said, "I win again." Something inside me hardened after the meeting. I went back to my desk, shut the door, and stared at the company logo printed on my ID card. For the first time, I wondered what that logo really stood for: merit or manipulation. I had played by the rules, believing competence would always rise. Daniel was proving me wrong, but if he thought I'd simply fade into the background, he didn't know me at all. I started documenting everything. Every email he forwarded without credit. Every conversation where he twisted my words. Every spreadsheet he altered before presenting it. I even saved the timestamp showing when he accessed my files, and I wasn't the only one watching. One afternoon, the head of finance, Lydia Tran, stopped by my cubicle. She was sharp, known for her integrity, a quiet force in the company. "I've noticed something odd," she said. "Daniel's expense reports don't match the project budgets you filed. Did he get your sign-off?" "No," I replied slowly. "He never consults me before submitting them." Lydia frowned. "Keep an eye on it. Something doesn't add up." That night I stayed late, combing through records. The deeper I dug, the stranger things became: approvals for transactions I'd never seen. Vendors that didn't appear in our system 6 months ago. I didn't yet understand what Daniel was doing, but I knew one thing. He was hiding something big, and for the first time, I wasn't scared. I was curious. He'd spent months undermining me, cutting me out piece by piece. But he'd also made one fatal mistake. He'd taught me how he operated. And now, I was going to use that knowledge against him. For months, I tried to stay composed, telling myself that hard work eventually pays off. But in the corporate world, hard work without power is just free labor for someone else's ambition. By early winter, the COO's retirement was the talk of the entire company. Mr. Callahan had been a fair, steady leader, one of the last people who truly valued competence over connections. His departure would leave a void, and everyone knew it. Rumors began swirling that I was a strong candidate to replace him. I didn't start them, but I didn't deny them either. After all, I'd worked side by side with Callahan for years, handled operations during crises, and built processes that still ran under my systems. It wasn't arrogance, it was fact. Callahan himself had pulled me aside 2 weeks before his final day. "Emily," he'd said, "you've earned this. You understand this company better than anyone. I'll be recommending you personally." Those words carried me through sleepless nights. I imagined how it would feel to finally step into that office, not for validation but for vindication. For proof that merit still meant something. Then came the announcement. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in my cubicle, sipping lukewarm coffee, catching up on reports when my email pinged, "Subject, new Chief Operating Officer appointment." My heart leapt. I opened it, and there it was in bold black letters. "We are pleased to announce that Daniel Harrington has been appointed as the new Chief Operating Officer of Harrington Dynamics." The words blurred for a second. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and nausea below the announcement. Daniel's photo smiled out, confident, polished, victorious. The email praised his strategic vision, leadership potential, and commitment to innovation. Not a single mention of the people who had built the foundation he was standing on. I read the message 3 times, hoping I'd misinterpreted it. I hadn't. Minutes later, the office buzzed with congratulations. Balloons appeared near the boardroom, and someone wheeled in a cake. Daniel's assistant passed by my desk and offered me a slice with a sympathetic smile. As if to say, "Better luck next time," I forced a polite grin and declined. That afternoon, Daniel called for an all-hands meeting. Standing at the front of the room, basking in applause, he began. "I know this might be a surprise to some, but I promise this company's best days are ahead. Together, we'll redefine how operations lead innovation." He caught my eye mid-speech and held it for a second, that same look of smug triumph. The message was clear: I win again. When the meeting ended, he walked up to me and extended his hand. "No hard feelings, right?" he said smoothly. You'll still be invaluable under my leadership. I shook his hand, smiled thinly, and replied, "Of course." "Congratulations, Daniel." But inside something snapped. Not in anger, in clarity. That night, as the office lights dimmed and celebration echoes faded, I sat alone at my desk. Around me were the remnants of everything I had built: projects, reports, systems that bore my fingerprints but his signature. The air felt heavy, suffocating with injustice. I realized then that waiting for fairness was naive. Daniel hadn't climbed by merit, he had climbed by manipulation. And I'd handed him every rung of that ladder because I believed the system would protect the honest. It wouldn't, but I could, so I stopped playing defense. That night, I started backing up files, cross-referencing documents, and building what I called my shadow ledger, a private record of everything Daniel touched. Transactions, approvals, internal memos, all quietly copied, time-stamped, and saved. Because if Daniel had taught me anything, it was that power didn't belong to those who spoke the loudest. It belonged to those who knew where the truth was buried, and I was about to dig it up. The day Daniel became COO was the day I stopped waiting for recognition and started planning for justice. Not the kind of justice that came from shouting or confronting, that never worked with people like him. No, mine would be quiet, patient, and absolute. I remember the night it began. The office was nearly empty, save for the faint hum of the VACAN, the low whir of computers left running overnight. I sat there with the glow of my monitor reflecting off the glass walls, watching Daniel's new title appear across every internal memo: Chief Operating Officer. The words didn't sting anymore, they motivated me. I opened my private drive and began a new folder. Shadow. I started small. I compiled emails where Daniel had forwarded my work without credit. Then, attachments showing identical figures later presented under his name. I built timelines, precise, meticulous, irrefutable. Not out of vengeance, but strategy. Then I dug deeper. I began tracking patterns. Daniel had a habit of fast-tracking approvals, bypassing certain procedures, especially when budgets were tight. He signed documents without waiting for a proper departmental clearance. On paper, it looked like efficiency. In reality, it looked like control, but I knew I couldn't take him down alone. That's where Lydia Tran came in. Lydia, head of finance, had a reputation for catching things others missed. She was the company's conscience in a tailored suit. We'd exchanged wary glances in meetings before, both noticing Daniel's inconsistencies. One afternoon, I found her in the break room, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Lydia," I said quietly, "do you have a minute?" She looked up, cautious but curious. "I've been noticing irregularities in the COO's expense authorizations," I continued. "I think you have too." She studied me for a moment, then set down her cup. "Meet me after hours," she said. "We'll talk numbers." That night, under the sterile glow of office lights, Lydia and I pored over spreadsheets. It didn't take long to find the rot. Dozens of transactions linked to a vendor that didn't exist 6 months ago. Payments signed off by Daniel directly. The vendor name? Triart Consulting, a shell company hidden behind layers of paperwork. "He's siphoning funds," Lydia murmured, scrolling through the ledgers. "Small enough to blend in, but consistent. Every month." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Daniel wasn't just arrogant, he was corrupt. "Can we trace it back to him?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. "But if we collect enough approvals, sign-offs, and timestamps, maybe—" So we did. Quietly, over weeks, we cross-referenced budgets, emails, and digital footprints. Every piece of evidence went into my growing archive. I labeled them carefully. Proof A, Proof B, Proof C. I began building allies, too, discreetly. The HR director, who'd grown tired of Daniel's favoritism. The IT manager, who helped me recover deleted correspondence. Even one board member, Mr. Ellis, who had once told me, "Smart people get overlooked here, Emily. Don't let them forget your worth." Each ally didn't know the full story, only their small piece of it. But together, they were my silent network, my insurance policy, and through it all, I maintained the perfect facade. I attended Daniel's meetings, took his orders, smiled during company announcements. I became the picture of professionalism, reliable, composed, forgettable. That was my camouflage. The more Daniel underestimated me, the easier it became to watch him unravel. His arrogance made him sloppy, a misplaced file here, a forgotten email chain there. Every misstep I quietly captured. Weeks turned into months. The weight of what I knew grew heavier by the day, but so did my confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was positioning myself because when the time came to strike, I wouldn't need to shout, accuse, or beg for justice. I would simply show the truth, and when I did, it wouldn't just end Daniel's career. It would redefine mine. It happened faster than I expected. By early spring, Daniel's overconfidence had grown into recklessness. His calendar was packed with executive dinners and innovation summits, all vague entries with inflated expense reports to match. Lydia and I had gathered enough evidence to fill a binder, but I knew timing was everything. Strike too early and he'd spin it as a misunderstanding. Wait too long, and he'd bury the proof under charm and family connections. Then fate intervened. One Monday morning, whispers spread through the office. The quarterly numbers didn't add up. Finance had found a six-figure discrepancy between projections and actual spend. Lydia played her part perfectly. She raised the issue in a leadership meeting, voice calm but firm, saying, "We've noticed an inconsistency in the COO's discretionary budget. We're initiating a review." Daniel laughed it off. "Accounting errors happen all the time," he said smoothly. "I'll have my assistant sort it out." But the CEO, his uncle, wasn't smiling. "Make sure you do," he replied coolly. "We can't afford sloppy books, Daniel." That single sentence shifted the tone in the room. For the first time, Daniel's confidence cracked. I stayed silent, pretending to take notes, hiding the spark of satisfaction that flickered inside me. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Over the next few days, the internal audit team began their review. Daniel grew visibly tense. He called impromptu meetings, demanded updates, and even began snapping at staff. The charming veneer was thinning. One evening, after everyone had left, I stayed behind in the operations wing. Lydia slipped into my office, a file in hand. "They're looking into Triarch," she said quietly. "They've noticed the invoices, but they don't have the link to Daniel yet." I opened the folder and saw it, the digital signature approvals from his account. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the missing funds. It was enough to raise suspicion, not yet to convict. "Let them find the trail," I said. "When they do, we'll be ready." The next morning, Daniel summoned me to his office. His tone was sharp, his usual charm gone. "You've been spending a lot of late nights here," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Working on anything I should know about?" I met his gaze evenly. "Just operations cleanup. Making sure everything's audit ready." He smirked faintly, though his eyes betrayed unease. "Good, I'd hate to think my team wasn't loyal." That word, loyal, lingered in the air like a threat. The following week, the CFO called an emergency meeting with the executive board. "We've discovered repeated transactions authorized under Triarch Consulting," he explained, flipping through slides. "No legitimate business record exists for this vendor. Funds total approximately $380,000 over 4 quarters. Gasps rippled across the table. The CEO turned to Daniel. "You signed these." Daniel straightened. "That's impossible. There must be a forgery." Lydia spoke next, calm as ever. "The system logs show your credentials, Daniel. Multiple times." He went pale. "Then someone's framing me." That's when the CEO's eyes shifted toward me. "Emily, you've worked closely on operations. What's your read on this?" I paused. The moment felt suspended in air. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum. Then I said carefully, "I think we should let the audit run its course. The truth will come out." Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew. The meeting adjourned in chaos, Daniel storming out, his phone pressed to his ear. I watched him go, feeling the balance of power tilt ever so slightly. For months, I'd lived in his shadow, quietly enduring his arrogance, his theft, his dismissals. But now, for the first time, he was the one scrambling for control. The tide had turned, and it was only just beginning to pull him under. The morning of the board meeting felt electric, like the air before a storm. The tension in the building was palpable. People whispered in hallways, doors closed faster than usual, and Daniel's office lights stayed on long after midnight. Everyone knew something big was coming. They just didn't know what I did. The board had called for an emergency session to address the audit findings. I'd spent the entire weekend preparing, reviewing files, cross-checking signatures, making sure every piece of evidence was airtight. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was about integrity, about setting right what he'd tried to destroy. 9 a.m. The conference room filled with executives, department heads, and the board members themselves. The air was thick with tension and the faint scent of cologne and burnt coffee. Daniel entered last, face pale but posture defiant. He gave me a quick glance, half warning, half plea. The CEO cleared his throat. "We're here to address allegations of financial misconduct involving the COO's discretionary accounts. Daniel, we'll start with you." Daniel straightened his tie. "This is all a misunderstanding," he began smoothly. "There's no misconduct, just a few accounting errors blown out of proportion. I've already asked for a forensic review." The CFO shook his head. "That review's been completed." He clicked a remote and the projector lit up. "The discrepancies point directly to vendor accounts tied to Triarch Consulting authorized exclusively under your credentials." Daniel forced a laugh. "So what, now my password gets stolen and I'm a criminal? Ridiculous." That's when the CEO turned to me. "Emily, you've worked closest to these operations. What do you have to add?" The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes shifted toward me. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my voice was steady. "I have the audit trail," I said. "And the timeline." I connected my laptop to the screen. One by one, I pulled up the receipts, approvals, and emails, each one linking Daniel's digital signature to fraudulent transfers. I showed time-stamped server logs, proving he'd accessed the Triarch account minutes before authorizations were processed. Then I opened one final file, a voice memo. It played Daniel's voice, recorded from a meeting weeks earlier, laughing. "Triarch is just a workaround. Everyone does it. What the board doesn't know won't hurt them." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Daniel shot up from his chair. "That's taken out of context," he barked. "You can't sit down," the CEO said sharply. His voice had lost all warmth. "Enough." Daniel froze. The CEO turned to me again. "Emily, how long have you known about this?" I hesitated. "Long enough to be certain before speaking." I didn't want to accuse without proof. Lydia spoke next, sliding another document across the table. "We've confirmed the shell company's registration under an offshore account. Ownership traces back to Daniel Harrington." It was over. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the CEO exhaled slowly, his face ashen. "Daniel, I can't protect you from this. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending legal review." Daniel looked at me, not with arrogance this time, but disbelief. His voice broke slightly. "You planned this." I didn't flinch. "No," I said quietly. "You did, when you told me to wait my turn." Security was called. As they escorted him out, the room stayed silent except for the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway. When the door finally closed, I felt an overwhelming stillness. Relief, sorrow, and something deeper. Justice. The CEO turned back to me. "Emily," he said, his voice softer now, "thank you for bringing this forward. We'll need someone steady to help us rebuild." I nodded. I wasn't smiling, not yet. But for the first time in years, I felt seen. The storm had broken. For the first time in 5 years, the office was silent when Daniel wasn't in it. His laughter, that practiced, confident tone that once filled the corridors, was gone. His office door, once constantly revolving with eager subordinates, now stood closed, sealed off like a tomb, the morning after the board meeting. A company-wide memo went out, effective immediately. "Daniel Harrington has been placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation. No explanation. No defense, just an empty statement." But everyone knew. By noon, whispers had replaced the silence. Employees lingered by the elevators, huddled in corners. Words like fraud, audit, and embezzlement traveled like wildfire. Every department speculated, but only a few of us knew the full truth. I kept my composure, showing up early, working late, speaking only when needed. Lydia advised me to stay quiet, let the evidence do the talking. Don't gloat, not even a smile. She was right. Corporate memory is short, but judgment lasts forever. 2 days later, Daniel came back, escorted by HR and security. He wasn't in a suit this time. His tie was missing, his hair slightly disheveled, his usual swagger replaced by something hollow. People froze as he passed. No one spoke. No one looked him in the eye. He stopped briefly at his office door, glanced at me across the hallway, and said quietly, "You really think you won?" I didn't answer. I just met his gaze, steady, unflinching, until he looked away. Security stood by as he packed a few things, a framed photo, a fountain pen, a nameplate that read Daniel Harrington. He hesitated before dropping it into the box. As if letting it go made the fall real, when he left, the air in the building felt lighter, but not cleaner, like the moment after a storm. When debris still floats in the air, later that afternoon, the CEO called me into his office. His tone was subdued, his eyes tired. "This has been difficult," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "I never wanted things to end this way. Daniel was family, but what he did, I can't overlook that." "I understand," I replied softly. And I did. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about consequence. The CEO studied me for a long moment. "You handled yourself with grace. Emily, you could have made this personal, but you didn't. You protected the company." That word, protected, stayed with me, he sighed. "We'll need interim leadership while the dust settles. The board is meeting tomorrow to decide the next steps. I'd like you to be there." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't nothing. That night, I stayed late again. The building was empty, just like it had been the night I started the shadow folder. I walked past Daniel's old office. The blinds were open, the desk bare except for a faint ring where his coffee mug used to sit. I stood there for a long time, remembering everything, the smirks, the dismissals, the humiliation. The quiet determination that had carried me through. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved, because taking him down hadn't been the end goal. It was the cleansing, the necessary purge before the company could breathe again. Still, I couldn't ignore the irony. He had told me once, "You should wait your turn." Now, his turn had ended. As I shut off the lights and headed for the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass doors, tired but calm. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. The real test would come next, not exposing corruption, but proving I could rebuild what it destroyed, tomorrow. The board would decide the company's future, and mine, and this time I wouldn't be waiting. The next morning, the board meeting felt different. The energy that used to buzz with Daniel's confidence was gone, replaced by an uneasy quiet. The company had been shaken, and everyone knew we were standing at a crossroads. I arrived early, as always. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. Sunlight spilled across the long table, highlighting the empty chair where Daniel used to sit. For the first time, it didn't intimidate me. The CEO entered a few minutes later, followed by the board members. They greeted me politely, though some looked uncomfortable. As if unsure how to treat me now, the woman who had brought down one of their own. "Thank you for coming in." "Emily," the CEO said, motioning for me to sit. "You've had a remarkable few weeks." "That's one word for it," I said with a faint smile. A few people chuckled quietly. The tension eased a little. The CFO began the meeting by summarizing the audit's conclusion. The investigation confirms the misappropriation of funds and fraudulent use of company accounts by Daniel Harrington. Legal proceedings are underway. The company's losses will be recovered in full. The CEO nodded solemnly, then turned his gaze to me. "This company owes you a debt. Emily, you could have stayed silent, most people would have, but you didn't. You protected the integrity of this organization." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Years of invisibility had taught me to expect acknowledgement to stop just short of recognition. But then he continued, "The board has discussed succession," he said. "We need someone steady, someone who understands not just the systems, but the people behind them. Someone we can trust?" He paused, just long enough for my heartbeat to quicken. "We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Operating Officer." The words landed softly, but their weight filled the room. I blinked, stunned. "Sir?" "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," said Mr. Ellis, one of the senior board members. "You've earned it." Lydia smiled from across the table. Her eyes said everything. Finally, I took a breath, steadying myself. "Then yes," I said quietly. "I accept." Applause broke out, brief, restrained, but genuine. For the first time, it wasn't the polite clapping reserved for hierarchy. It was respect. As the meeting wrapped up, the CEO stood and extended his hand. "You've shown what true leadership looks like," he said. "Not ambition without ethics, but strength with purpose." "Thank you," I replied. "I just did what needed to be done." He smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this job." When the meeting ended, I lingered in the hallway outside the boardroom. Through the glass, I could see Daniel's old nameplate being removed from the door down the hall. The maintenance staff replaced it with a temporary one, Emily Carter, Chief Operating Officer. For a long time, I just stood there, looking at it. Not because I couldn't believe it, but because I could. Every late night, every humiliation, every time I'd been told to wait my turn, it had led here, but this wasn't victory born of vengeance. It was the quiet triumph of persistence, of choosing patience over pride, integrity over shortcuts. When I finally walked into my new office, the view from the window was breathtaking. The city stretched endlessly below, sunlight reflecting off 1,000 windows, each one a reminder of how far I'd come. I sat down behind the desk, ran my hand along the smooth surface, and smiled, not out of pride, but peace. Daniel's rise had been fast, loud, and crooked. Mine had been slow, silent, and unshakably earned. And in the end, the company didn't need a golden PROT acute G acute. It needed someone who'd been underestimated until she couldn't be ignored. 3 months had passed since. I took Daniel's chair. The company had steadied itself, though the scars of the scandal were still visible in whispers that faded when I walked by, in cautious glances exchanged between departments. Trust doesn't return overnight. It rebuilds one decision at a time. I made sure of that. The first thing I did as COO was dismantle the old hierarchy Daniel had built, the one where charm mattered more than results. I replaced it with transparency, accountability, and open doors. I promoted people who had gone unnoticed for years, the quiet, diligent ones who never sought attention but carried the company on their backs. One of them, a young analyst named Priya, reminded me of myself years ago, bright, hardworking, often dismissed. When she presented her first proposal in the executive meeting, her hands trembled slightly, but her data was flawless. Afterward, I pulled her aside. "You did great," I told her. "Don't wait for permission to lead." She smiled, the same nervous, grateful smile I once had. It struck me then how far the circle had turned. The company culture began to shift. Slowly but surely. People spoke up more. Departments collaborated instead of competing. Lydia told me one afternoon, "You've changed the rhythm here, Emily. It feels human again." That night, long after everyone left, I sat in my office with the lights dimmed, looking out over the skyline. My reflection in the glass looked older, calmer, someone who had earned her place not by demanding it, but by enduring for it. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You won. I hope it was worth it." "Daniel," I stared at the words for a long time, then typed back, "It wasn't about winning. It was about doing what was right." He never replied. In truth, I didn't hate him anymore. He had been my obstacle, yes, but also my catalyst. Without his arrogance, I might never have found my voice. Without his dismissal, I might never have learned that patience can be the most dangerous weapon of all. A week later, the CEO called me into his office. "We're finalizing next quarter's vision statement," he said. "Would you like to write it?" I hesitated. "You mean, in my own words?" He nodded. "You've earned that right." That weekend, I stayed home and wrote in longhand, the way I used to take notes in those early days when no one noticed me. I wrote about trust, about integrity, about leadership not as dominance but service. When I read it aloud at the next company meeting, the room fell silent. Leadership isn't about who speaks the loudest, I said. It's about who listens longest. It's about showing up even when you're overlooked. It's about patience that outlasts pride and strength that doesn't need to shout. When I finished, the applause was quiet but steady, the kind that lingers after the words fade, afterward. As I stood at the window overlooking the floor, Lydia joined me. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she said softly. "It does," I admitted. "But it's not the title. It's the piece." She smiled. "That's how you know you're leading for the right reasons." I looked down at the rows of desks below, the same place where I'd once been invisible, waiting for my turn. Now, I wasn't waiting anymore. I was building something worth waiting for. As the city lights shimmered against the glass, I realized the truth. Sometimes the world tells you to wait your turn not because you're unready, but because it isn't ready for you yet. And when your moment finally comes, you don't need to announce it. You simply take your seat and lead.